Hello, this is Rusty. We're with Tim Barnett of Red Pen Logic, who is assessing a TED talk that Yuval Harari gave on human rights. Tim isn't convinced by Yuval's argument.
But human rights are just like heaven and like God. It's just a fictional story that we've invented and spread around.
Now, I'm going to offer a different objection to Yuval here than Tim is, in that I don't think it's correct to call them a human story, a fiction that we've spread around. I think it's more along the lines of we have come up with a reciprocal system whereby if we treat each other according to a certain common set of values, we all benefit as a consequence. And these rights haven't just appeared overnight either. They've taken millennia to become concretized in society. And a lot of places are still working on doing that. They're not universal across the world. They're universal in certain societies, but not globally, not yet.
It may be a very nice story. It may be a very attractive story. We want to believe it. But it's just a story. It's not a reality. It is not a biological reality.
Now, that statement's a little bit more accurate. Human rights aren't a biological reality. That seems fairly clear and self-evident.
Just as jellyfish and woodpeckers and ostriches have no rights, Homo sapiens have no rights also. Take a human, cut him open, look inside, you find their blood, and you find the heart and lungs and kidneys, but you don't find there any rights.
Now, of course, Tim is going to object to this section, and I think that is rightly so. But I don't think Yuval means it literally. I think he's being rhetorical here, that rights aren't a physical thing that you can put your finger on. And he's actually argued already that he believes them to be conceptual. He says that the fiction, I don't think fiction is a particularly useful word. In this context, it's going to throw Tim off the rails for starters.
The only place you find rights is in the fictional stories that humans have invented and spread around.
Some of you are thinking, what did I just watch? Well,
No, I'm not thinking that. I'm thinking I could have put that better, or I would have preferred if Yuval had put it better.
that was best-selling author Yuval Harari giving a now infamous TED Talk. First off, I gotta hand it to him. Harari is consistent. He's
Yes, he is.
wrong.
Well, we're going to have to wait to hear you prove that, aren't we, Tim? Somewhere in this video, Tim thinks he can prove Yuval is wrong. Or does he? Does he think that he can prove Yuval is wrong in this video? Or is he going to leave it at that assertion? Yuval is wrong, and then offer his own opinion. I'll let you be the judge.
But he's consistent. See, Harari is a materialist. That means he believes only the material world exists.
No, that's not what a materialist believes. A materialist believes that it is justified to base our explanations in the material because we know it exists. If anything else exists, we'll wait till evidence is sufficient to justify positing explanations based in that, once we know what that is and how those explanations would work. So you don't have to only think the material exists just because you're a materialist. That would be the difference between methodological and philosophical. Materialism in this case.
For him, objective reality is only what you can see, smell, hear, taste, and touch.
No, we have access to data through our five senses, but in order to investigate reality, often we have to use tools like telescopes or microscopes or petri dishes or wind vanes or electron microscopes if we go down a scale even further to look at atoms or the Hadron Collider and all sorts of other things that we've come up with to investigate what is beyond our five senses directly. They need a little help sometimes, is what I'm saying. We can't only use our senses, we have to use our senses plus additional tools.
And if reality is only what you can perceive with your five senses, then of course, human rights are not part of objective reality. They're merely fictional stories that we have invented. In defense of his claim that human rights are fiction, Harari says, take a human being, cut him open, look inside, you will find the heart, the kidneys, neurons, hormones, DNA, but you won't find any rights.
Yes, and I think that's rhetorical. I don't think he means it quite literally. He's making the point that they're not a physical thing, but his argument is that they're conceptual.
I want you to notice what's going on here. Harari simply assumes materialism. Of course, cutting someone open to find a human right only makes sense if human rights are material objects located somewhere in the human body.
Now, the problem here is, of course, is that you can have conceptual ideas, obviously, that you can say exist, but the sense that you're saying exist isn't the same sense that the body exists, or an organ exists, or a tree exists, or a lake exists, or a mountain exists, or planet Earth exists. It's a different kind of existence when we're talking about ideas and concepts. They don't exist in a concrete way.
But just because human rights aren't made of matter, like mountains and molecules, doesn't mean they aren't real. Human rights really do exist.
Well, there's the assertion again. And we're listening out for Tim demonstrating that Yuval is wrong. And instead of demonstrating that Yuval is wrong, we're hearing Tim offering his own assertion. Well, if that's the case, then we can just rebut Tim with the same logic that he used against Yuval. Well, you're consistent, Tim. You're wrong, but you're consistent.
And I think Harari knows it. True enough, you can't find a human right by cutting someone open and looking inside their body. However, I think you can find a human right by threatening to cut someone open. Here's what I mean.
Yes, I don't think you're going to demonstrate the point doing this. What you're going to demonstrate is that if it's good for me, it's good for you. So we come to an agreement to have this right in common because neither of us want to be cut open. And if we extend that to all of society, no individual member of society would particularly like to be cut open, and the leaders wouldn't like to be cut open by an opposition. And so we've come to a mutual agreement that cutting each other open is not good for humanity. Unless, of course, you lived in the Middle Ages when it was quite common as a form of punishment. Maybe Tim's forgotten that people did get cut open, hung, drawn and quartered.
Imagine Harari successfully convinces the world that human rights aren't real. They're just fictional stories we invented. And suppose some of those people are done playing make-believe about human rights and they get together, find Harari, and threaten to cut him open for the fun of it. After all, he doesn't really have a right to life. Any imaginary right that is invented can also be uninvented.
Yes, but this is universal, Tim. So the people who say that will immediately find 100 people behind them saying, "Oh, that's a nice throne you've got. I wouldn't mind if I sat on it." So they don't do this because they'll be victims of their own machinations. They'll be hoisted on their own petard.
Now, most of us, especially Harari, would have a legitimate problem with that. But why?
Because you don't want it to happen to you, so you don't do it to other people. That's where the right comes from. It is in line with Yuval's argument.
Is it merely because some people aren't playing by the made-up rules of a fictional story?
Yes. Except we expel those people because once you go down that road and the right breaks down, we're in a situation of anarchy. People start cutting each other up for the fun of it. We tend to lock them up. We don't approve of that. And the fact that Tam doesn't get there is a little bit worrying.
No, it's much deeper than that. It's because Harari and everyone who has ever drawn breath has been created with intrinsic value and...
Hold on, Tim. They've been what? They've been created with intrinsic value. I don't recall you demonstrating that point. So we have here the introduction of a premise that hasn't been supported, which is what? Fallacious. It's begging the question. So would you like to demonstrate that we've been created and then demonstrate that we've been created with these inalienable rights that you're going to argue for?
And as a result is endowed with inalienable human rights.
So we have the assertion again, a double assertion there, that is premised but hasn't been evidenced.
Therefore, Harari has a real fundamental right to life, regardless of whether society protects that right or not.
So Tim is using his own belief to argue against Harari's belief. Except Yuval's belief isn't predicated on Tim's argument being correct. It's a different worldview, where we don't have a divine magician in the sky somehow giving inalienable. What is it that God did here, Tim? In what way did God give humans rights but not all the other animals? What is it that God did? I'm not hearing an explanation for what actually happened, which is common with apologetics. We've heard an assertion that God, inverted commas, gave humans inalienable rights. But what is it that happened here? How do you give someone an inalienable human right that exists in a concrete sense? How is it that it exists concretely? What is it that a human right is that God has given us, in your view?
Harari's materialism leaves him unable to ground the human rights he enjoys and
No, that's completely false.
desperately needs.
Sorry, Tim, but that's a lie. We can grant human rights. And Yuval put forward an idea that they're conceptual. He called it a fiction, which I think is questionable language. But the idea is that humans have come up with this system of rights that we extend towards each other. And the reason is reciprocity. What I would like to be done to me is something that you would probably like to be done to you. What I would not like to be done to me is something that you probably would not like to be done to you. And that is the basis of rights. Reciprocity. You don't need an invisible magical magician that lives outside time and space for that. You just need common agreement. And funnily enough, the brain has mirror neurons, so we know what it feels like when rights are violated by seeing it happen to someone else. And we can look at that and think, I would not like that to happen to me. And we have millennia of history that we can look back at and see violations of what are now rights that weren't rights at the time. And say, I would not like to have lived at that time period when humans didn't have rights and they were routinely butchered, routinely subjected to cruel and unusual punishments, routinely starved because nations were at war or their leaders were corrupt or whatever. We could look at history and see all these things that happened. And this is to be contrary to Tim's argument that they're inalienable and God-given, from the creation, no less. Because for millennia, they were absent. That seems to be questionable.
But the solution isn't to deny human rights. The solution is to deny materialism.
No, nobody's denying either here, Tim. So Yuval accepts human rights as a fiction. I think the language is a little bit questionable and tenuous. But the idea is that they're conceptual, that humans have come up with them, and I'm arguing that they are based on reciprocity.
Next time you say the words, I support the right to, or we should all have the right to, I want you to think about this question. Are you just stating a figment of your imagination, or are you saying something fundamentally true about reality?
Neither. I'm expressing the concept that humans have come to a mutual agreement on, based on reciprocity. That was what? A false dilemma. Well done, Tim. So much for your red pen and your logic. I don't think we'll even let the clip play out where you put it back in your cup. Yes, so keep calm. I'm not an apologist. I'm an anti-apologist. Goodbye.